It's 1945. The war has ended, Hitler and his wife Eva are taking their own lives in an underground bunker, and the Allies are about to find things that'll haunt their dreams for years to come. The aftermath of the Holocaust. Millions upon millions of Jews, Catholics, political enemies, and even disabled Germans. The world was shocked by what the Nazis did. There wasn't going to be any peace after surrender for them, and they knew that, which is why they started fleeing the country in search of a safe haven to bury their Nazi uniforms. Today, we talk about what happened to the Nazis after World War II. Make sure to subscribe, and let's get to the video. Heinrich Himmler, the second in charge. After the Allies attacked Germany, the Nazis all left except for one notable Nazi. Heinrich Himmler was the commander of the Waffen-SS and a prominent member of the Nazi Party. One of the Holocaust's primary directors, he eventually fell out of favor with Hitler in the final days of the war and attempted to initiate peace talks with the Allies. When Hitler learned about this, Himmler was sacked and arrested. He attempted to flee into hiding under a fictitious name but was apprehended at a checkpoint when the Nazi regime crumbled. When British soldiers discovered that his false documents bore an SS stamp, Himmler was obliged to acknowledge who he was. He was detained, but when examined by a doctor, he bit into a cyanide pill and died instantly. Heinrich Himmler, like his boss, had managed to avoid prosecution. However, there were many more targets available. Albert Speer, the ignorant Nazi. The Nuremberg trials were one of the largest post-war tribunals ever held, and the Allies moved quickly. They began barely a few months after the war ended and lasted nearly a year, from November 1945 to October 1946. In total, 24 of Nazi Germany's most powerful political and military officials were tried. Many of these men were among the architects of Hitler's military and genocidal machine. 13 of these men were executed for war crimes, while others were convicted on lesser accounts, acquitted, or released due to illness. Some rulings, though, sparked more debate than others. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, was one of his most trusted allies. While he was not personally in control of the death camps, he was in charge of the department that evicted Jewish inhabitants and in the employment of slave labor to build German war machines. As a result, he was accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and he faced the death penalty, as did many of his compatriots. He narrowly evaded execution, though, and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. From then, he chose a new approach, portraying himself as a humble bureaucrat who was unaware of Hitler's worst crimes. His interviews and 2 books were regarded as a unique peek inside Nazi Germany, but many historians believe his claims of not being actively involved in the Holocaust fall flat, a topic that will remain unresolved following his stroke death in 1981. Julius Stryker, Goebbels' predecessor. The majority of the names at Nuremberg were military and government figures, with one notable exception. While the name Joseph Goebbels is most associated with Nazi Germany's propaganda, there was one guy who paved the way for him. Julius Stryker was a regional politician and legislator who rose to prominence as the editor of the anti-Semitic propaganda publication Der Stürmer. Stryker's article was inciting violence against individual Jewish inhabitants of Germany even before Hitler assumed power. However, while he held political office within the Nazi dictatorship, he was never a member of Hitler's inner circle. He was suspected of spreading false charges against Hermann Göring and was stripped of party offices in 1940, but this did not protect him in 1945. Allied soldiers apprehended him. Despite the fact that he was not a member of the military, he was charged with inciting genocide for his involvement in propagating Nazi propaganda, and he was hanged on October 16, 1946. The Nuremberg tribunals were over, but the hunt for justice was only beginning, and it would be a great time for you to subscribe before we get to the fun part. The Nazi hunter and the Mossad. It was becoming more difficult to locate the remaining Nazis. However, new hunters were emerging. Simon Weisenthal, a Jewish man born in Austria-Hungary in 1908, and his wife barely escaped Nazi extermination camps. He compiled a list of Nazi war criminals and gave it to American officers after the war. This led to him being hired by the American Office of Strategic Services. but it soon became clear that the momentum for pursuing Nazi criminals was fading. Weisenthal went it alone, gathering material on Nazi war criminals and attempting to locate them abroad. He became one of the most tenacious advocates for Holocaust victims, establishing the Simon Weisenthal Center to trace Nazi war criminals and combat anti-Semitism. But he was a citizen, and he would need government assistance to bring the remaining Nazis out of hiding. Fortunately for him, 1948 would see a significant change in the world. The surviving Jewish people's need for a safe refuge increased in the aftermath of the Holocaust. The newly established United Nations voted in 1948 to split the land, with the western half becoming the State of Israel and the newly formed espionage service, the Mossad, joining it. Adolf Eichmann, capture of the century. Aside from preserving the state, the Mossad had another goal in mind: finding the last Nazi war criminals. And at the top of their list was one name in particular. Adolf Eichmann shared more than just his first name with his boss. He was a firm believer in Hitler's Holocaust, and as an SS officer, he oversaw the wholesale deportation and extermination of the majority of Europe's Jews. While he was apprehended by the US shortly after Germany's capitulation, he managed to flee his initial incarceration center and hide in France for several years. In 1950, he fled to Argentina, using fraudulent passports provided by a bishop with Nazi sympathies. He kept a low profile as a government contractor, but by 1956 he was planning to publish a biography with the help of Nazi journalist Wilhelm Sassen. That arrogance was going to be his undoing. Simon Weisenthal had been hunting Eichmann since the end of the war, and in 1953 he received word that the fugitive had been spotted in Buenos Aires. But it wasn't until 1960, when Eichmann's father died, that he got a huge break in the case. Weisenthal sent private detectives to photograph the funeral and then gave the photos to Mossad personnel. Lothar Hermann, an informant in Argentina, also said that his daughter dated a man who claimed to be Eichmann's son and recognized his father. They had enough evidence to capture Eichmann and bring him over to stand trial, but Argentina rarely accepted extradition arrests. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's prime minister, made the decision to take affairs into their own hands, and thus began one of the most important missions in Mossad history. An 8-man squad led by Mossad operative Rafi Eitan was dispatched to Buenos Aires to closely monitor Eichmann's movements. They chose an abandoned site where he would walk every day on his way from the bus to apprehend him. Despite the fact that the operation was almost abandoned when Eichmann was not on his normal bus, the operatives remained on standby, and he got off the following bus. The squad carried Eichmann to a car and hid him under a blanket. They then relocated him from one safe location to another over the course of 9 days to ensure they had the right man. But there was still one more phase to the operation: returning Eichmann to Israel. He was sedated, dressed as a flight attendant, and boarded one of Israel's flights, which had just returned from Argentina with a diplomatic group. While the jet was delayed because the flight plan needed to be checked, the Mossad's ploy went undetected. Eichmann was transported back to Israel, and his capture was revealed in front of a nation filled with Holocaust survivors. While Argentina was outraged by the covert capture, Israel refused to abandon their plan to try Eichmann. He was interrogated for 9 months, during which time he displayed little remorse and did not appear to recognize his role in the Nazi slaughter. As a result, journalist Hannah Arendt coined the phrase, "the banality of evil." He was later accused and convicted of 15 crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes against the Jewish people. On Israeli land, Adolf Eichmann became one of only 2 people to ever face the death penalty, and the first since the country's independence, hanging on May 31, 1962. Now an important question arises. Are there any Nazi war criminals still alive out there? Even the youngest soldiers would be in their 90s now, but if any have gotten away with escaping justice until now, the odds are someone is still looking for them. Thank you for watching today's video, and if you did enjoy it, subscribe and watch this video to know about what really happened in Nazi concentration camps.